we're talking about discussing the sun, the place I always go to is the elements, the modality, what it was in history, what it tends to do, both positive and negative. And so, in that way, Virgo is a family of female signs. Any of the signs in the earth or water category are female or female, and that would include Capricorn, Taurus, and Virgo. That would include Cancer and Scorpio and Pisces. And so the rest of the signs are assumed to be male. So I'd start there. And then the modality would describe, is it the type of energy that goes forward and begins things? Is it the type of energy that sits still and kind of stabilizes things? Or is it the kind of energy that is the liaison between those two quite different energies that sometimes has to flex and sometimes has to stabilize?
Well, and I wanted to say, so back to where you started talking about the mode and the element of the sun. And I think that's so important because, understanding that there are mutable signs, let's say.
Right.
And so somebody who's got a sun in Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, Sagittarius.
Yeah.
Mutable means adaptable. There's going to be less consistency with those sun signs. There's going to be wiggle room. They are going to be more prone to shifting based on what else is going on in the chart. Pisces is the most mutable sign. So depending on what else is going on in the chart, Pisces also another sign that has been hard to nail down, and the sun sign descriptions haven't done it justice.
I agree with you. Jeff Dower used to posit that Pisces is the reason why he doesn't want astrology institutionalized or to become part of our systems, because the ability of people to kind of flick Pisces off of the map is too built up. Can you imagine looking at a job application and you'd be like, let's get all the Capricorns in here? There would be real and damaging judgments around people.
Yeah, if those people are depending on sun sign astrology to guide them, there could be tough. Those mutable signs are also more prone to the sign that the ruling planet is in. So just this last month, I've had a couple experiences being able to work in groups. What I noticed is the assumption that certain people really resonate with their sun sign versus people who don't necessarily resonate with their sun sign isn't always the easiest thing to pin down. What I'm realizing is that the weight on the ruling planet needs to be heavier a lot of the time.
It makes me think of an ensemble versus solo performance. And so to think of the mutable sun as part of this larger ensemble, almost as someone who is actively holding a container for many elements, it's really quite different. And there's that piece of where do you let people bump up against you? And I think because mutable is the adjusting modality, that is, you're going to be experiencing people bumping up against you. So you'll want a process or you'll want a system for working with these different energies in a way that perhaps cardinal and fixed don't have to accommodate.
Whereas, if you look at especially the fixed sign, Leo, Scorpio, Taurus, Aquarius, fixed sun signs are often going to be far more like their sun, because that fixed energy is exactly as we describe it, fixed. Not going to move. Fire cannot burn without oxygen. Fire can't shine without an audience. And that was a huge shift for me. This part, like you said, that doesn't want to be told what to do, but at the same time, there have to be people.
I love that tension because fire is also the only element that can be put out, right? You can't put out earth, can't put out water, can't put out air.
That then leads to, well, it's actually the most fragile of the elements. That's a big piece of fire signs that we don't read about because there's this big energy and there's this flash and exuberance about fire. But at the same time, it's extremely conscious that something can't just come and put it out.
What do you think? The Aries, ready, shoot, aim.
I think Aries are misunderstood for sure. And I think sometimes they do it to themselves. There's a hasty quality to Aries energy. It does things too fast. It does things without thinking. That just general Aries energy, not necessarily the sun in Aries. But the sun is exalted in Aries.
Right.
It feels special in Aries.
It's been looking forward to Aries.
When we think about the cycles, Aries is the beginning. The sun goes into Aries in April. That's our spring up here in the Northern Hemisphere. It's the beginning. It starts stuff. One of the misconceptions that I have found is that people like to call Aries energy leaders. They're leaders in that they'll do things first. And then you can learn from their mistakes or their conquests or their achievements. Yes. But Aries energy is not interested in guiding a team of people
or building or sustaining maybe some other part of their chart. But I agree with you. It is experiential on the face of it. It is to experience life and to experience the growth that comes from challenges, to be courageous to a certain extent, that what you're sensing in the moment is all that there has to be. Part of that sense might come from its place in that natural chart where it's the first, that sense of it being visible, where it's going to be seen. It's another inconspicuous sign. It's out there fitting and sparking. And it does, because of its courage, do amazing things, can innovate quite beautifully, and can get other people to be more brave.
An Aries leads by example. It doesn't lead by holding anybody's hand. It'll jump off the mountain and let you know how it was, and maybe give you some pointers on how to do it better. It feels like it, but it might just be on to the next thing already. It's interesting because we're talking about the sun. Aries likes to get credit for the things that it is proud of, but it's not the same as Leo in that way that it wants to get attention for just being. Things that are in that particular Aries sun's world, what was a risk? What was risky for them to do and achieve? That's what they want to get attention for, and they want people to notice. I always feel a resonance with Aries and the Fool card in the tarot deck. There's often an innocence to Aries energy, only in the fact that it doesn't look back.
That simplicity. And that's kind of like the vibe I get from Aries, is like, it is the natural vitality of life, and like how rich that is. And it is also how scary that is. And, that's part of it, is overcoming that like resistance to being in this space, and I do think of the senses. I think Aries, really want to feel everything, and, maybe they don't want to dwell there, but it's okay. It's okay to get some dings and some, arrows of misfortune, because they're just trying to get through the entire experience of life. And so there's, in the Fool card, the universe is going to support them if they follow their intuition. And I think there is some component of, that's where the dialogue is happening. It's with the universe. It's not necessarily with other people, or not necessarily with expectations or social ideas. It's with, can I vibe with my own path? Can I create that path that will take me to the end?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, when we're talking just fire in general, is one of the really intuitive elements.
Yeah.
That water always gets all that credit.
As well it should, but
there's an instinctual intuitiveness to fire.
Yeah.
That I think speaks to what you're saying about the Fool card, where it's like, if you're trusting that intuition, you'll be rewarded. And so I feel like there's this real instinctual place that Aries can live.
I like that.
That is, I think that if you're going to meet maybe a ragey Aries, or somebody with that really fiery Aries energy, it's because somebody got in the way of being able to follow that instinct and just keep doing what it's trying to do.
That's interesting.
I think that can create some challenges.
Yeah, there was something I wanted to say about fire, that there's a tremendous purification possibility with fire in general. And I think Aries holds that. There's a story, old myth about jumping through the fire to get married. You're clearing the old identities and coming out new. Fire can be so transformative. Those tales can be attached to Aries. There's a real kind of purification through action. There's an unsuspecting way to use fire, the intuition component of it.
I like it. When you watch fire, it goes where it needs to go. There is this instinctual thing about it. I think that's what entrances people. I don't know what I can watch fire forever. It's amazing. It's so cool.
And think about fire in society, right? Like from Prometheus to the folks who had a kitchen fire to people who tend fire. There's a real almost holy aspect to it. I guess because I would ascribe holiness to any of the elements, that feels a little ridiculous. There's something, it is naturally flashy, and then there's the caregiving that has to happen with it, where you're stoking the fire, even if you're keeping the ashes warm, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. There's definitely something magical about it. I think there is a magic to that combination that each Aries sun person gets to have. Yeah. But you always do have to look at Mars, because that's definitely going to tell you.
It's a good reminder. You got to look at the ruler.
The ruler of that sun is going to tell you a big chunk of that story for sure. Is, oh, I'm a Leo, but I don't need attention. There's lots of reasons that could be, but I bet you there's something that you're super proud of. There's something that you really take pride in that's really important to you. I've never had a Leo say no to that. As soon as you get passionate about that pride idea, they remember the thing. If you see the light, it's really quite intriguing.
Well, and it's not just light, it's vitality. If we don't let our sun be itself, the vitality just drains away. Great example.
Yeah, and vitality is such a great word for the sun and for Leo combined. Yeah. And so I feel like for some of us, and this is very true for me, if that sun isn't in a place where the sun actually gets to do its shining, we're older when we discover how that actually can be.
Shall we move on to Leo?
Yes, let's do it.
Conspicuous, another good description.
Whether they want to be or not. Yeah.
You can see them, the sun in Leo. You want to have people cheering you on, and you need it, and you shouldn't worry about whether that's appropriate. The worst thing you can do to a Leo, besides ignoring them, is to not celebrate their wins, because the heart is dictating all of this. You know, the idea that Leo represents the heart and the sun, and so it's in its natural place. If it's out of balance, more than any other sign, a Leo sun may have the capacity to drain others.
The fire signs, not necessarily sun, but just fire energy, that will suck the air out of a room, because it has to, if it's not getting what it needs.
That's really well said.
This is a general fire element statement, and it can manifest in a lot of different ways. I learned a lot about Leo from a coworker that I had, who was the most inconspicuous Leo you'd ever meet.
Sure.
I mean, I remember when I first met her working in a hair salon, and she was all dressed in brown, and her hair was brown. Like, it was all like this monotone palette. And she sat very quietly. She ate her lunch very properly. She barely spoke. And not mousy, like not timid, very fixed in her presence. But you wouldn't have guessed that she was a Leo for sure. It turns out she had, I don't remember, it was Capricorn and Virgo, sun and rising, but I don't remember which order. And she was definitely a Leo that had all of this Virgo energy from where those planets were sitting. That particular piece was the thing that shone through. When we got to know each other and we started talking about astrology, I knew her while I started, like, really, she was one of the people that really encouraged me to study it further. She was really intrigued and wanted to know more about her own astrology, as any good Leo would.
Yes.
But talking to her about how that that attention part of Leo, or that wanting to be sparkly and seen, how that played out for her and how self-aware she was about it, which was interesting. And what was neat with the combination of that Virgo Leo is that I knew when she was wearing something that she wanted somebody to notice, because she was very perfectly put together. If you were paying attention, you knew the thing that she wanted you to notice. And if you got it, you didn't have to gush. You just had to notice it, compliment it, and move on. And she was a different human being for the whole day. If you missed it, then she wasted her time. Nobody noticed it. It didn't.
They are doing the work to figure out how to funnel all this warmth out. And that is the goal, even if they're unsuccessful. To be present to that is really quite remarkable, really quite beautiful. That reciprocity is different than any other sign. Leo is giving so much of that sunny warmth, and it needs that right back.
And the thing to point out astrologically about Leo that's extremely unique is that's the only place the sun is in its place of comfort. It's the only place the sun gets to express itself purely. And so it is special.
I remember Jeff Jower saying, if I were to be able to pick a sun sign, I would pick Leo. It's because that playfulness is accessible, that warmth is accessible.
If we are thinking about the sun signs, you know, if they are, as we talked about in the beginning, in difficult situations or not where they can express wholly, then we are learning to become them.
Yes.
And that's where Leo's sun is headed. It's supposed to be headed. Should be headed. I don't know. I don't want to use any of those
the mature words, version of it, right? The mature version of a plant is flowers. It's not a hierarchy.
Right.
We'll get to the hierarchy, right? Because without question, Leo's on top. But I think what you're talking about is we, again, somatically in our bodies, we could not live without the sun. And that is not absent from the Leo archetype. Life-giving warmth, life-giving energy, life-giving. And so the need for reciprocity is pretty obvious. If, you know, all of the other signs are off the hook, don't you worry about it. You know, Virgo or Sagittarius, you don't have to give out your life-giving energy. Scorpio, bury it under the ground. You know, Capricorn, make hay of it. Leo, we're taking that. You know, we want to extract that from you, kind of thing. You start to get that sense of where it can go wrong. Then again, with the fire signs, that joke of, oh, you got burned by a fire sign? Why were you so close? You know, you haven't learned that fire's hot. I think of Leo as being very heart driven and very generous as well. I think of that as well. Right? They're the literal king that was designated by God, you know, like if you think about it. And that conversation we had earlier where the king is selected from the crowd to be a sacrifice if everything goes wrong, that's part of Leo. That feeling, whether it's true or not, that you're on the line if everything goes belly up, is part of that dynamic. It's risky to put yourself out. And it's not for just enjoying everything. And, you know, history tells us when people get power, they don't always make the right choices. They can be overwhelmed by the sensations they're craving, or overwhelmed by the feedback that they get.
The sun thrives in that fixed Leo because it just gets to be.
Yeah.
Nobody ever asks a Leo to be anything other than they are.
Right? You meet them where they are.
It's almost like an instinct that you just be you. You just do your thing. Back in the early days of reading about sun signs, Sagittarius was about truth and conviction or sort of truth. And the one thing that seemed to be consistent when you read or you asked people is the foot in mouth. I used to say, if you don't want to know what your ass actually looks like in those jeans, don't ask a Sagittarius. Because Jupiter energy doesn't necessarily think ahead to the consequences. Because it's their truth in the moment. We need to speak our truth, even though the truth might be different tomorrow.
If you're talking about the sun in Sagittarius, there's a breadth there that's often described as loves to travel. Along with Gemini, it's polar opposite, associated with things that are not native, or not from where you were born, the new ideas that come from other lands or other types of thinking. Long distance travel for Sagittarians.
That can happen in so many ways. It is a mutable sign. How that plays out is going to depend on the rest of the chart. And what is Jupiter doing? What's its ruling planet doing? It could be discovering what is happening with the wildlife in your backyard. That is enough of understanding the ecosystem in your backyard is enough removed from your own ecosystem that the discovery of that can be enriching. You can look at a chart and, like you said, it's Cancer moon. I might want to say go off and discover another culture, but you could do that in a book and be
or and go cook a foreign meal.
Or even just Sag in general, go join some kind of an app that delves into all of these things. I think about the Gaia app, which is spirituality and ideas and philosophies. Just something like that can be enough to feed that Sagittarius desire to discover things bigger than themselves.
And in the cultural discourse we're in at the moment, there's a lot of repair trying to happen around discovery that was really just overtaking. We're nowhere near any kind of solution or even functional discussion around that, but it's worth adding that to the mix of Sagittarius, where the discovery could be other people's stuff, and then this trampling happens. There's something about that clumsiness, and we talked about it with Chiron. Sagittarius is represented by a centaur. I know they're priests. I know they're ugly and rude, and if they pray over things before they drink, they're appropriate and centered. I got that from Philip Sedgwick. And I think about that with Chiron, the new information which you mentioned, which was he could have had a whole human body and then a horse butt attached to him, which is really distressing. It's kind of cool to think of half horse, half man, or half horse, half human as being, an entire horse and then the torso coming out. Like, let's do this, but being so vulnerable, being naked and a dumb human with a horse butt, that's embarrassing. And I don't mean like a tail coming out of your butt. I mean, two more legs and all your junk is out in the open. There is like some of that embarrassment with Sagittarius.
That's another word I love for Sagittarius, conspicuous.
I love that.
There's really no way to not be conspicuous when you have visible Sag energy. It doesn't mean that people will see you clearly, but you don't get to hide.
That leads to the other component, which is misunderstood. That is part of the mix with Sagittarius, is that it's hard to understand. And I'm going back to Stephen Forrest, E=MC² is how Sagittarius talks. They want to talk to you without all the extra context and share these profound ideas. And without the extra context, there may not be any understanding. Yeah. They like to talk about ideas. They run away from conflict.
To me, Sag is the quintessential feel-good sign. Whatever feel-good means for an individual is, very different. Sagittarius really likes to feel good, and also really likes when other people feel good. It wants to share.